Good morning, Natasha Daly. Welcome on VH Berries.
Good morning, Victor. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
I found out that before being a journalist, you were an English teacher in Busan, South Korea.
Yes, I lived in Busan, South Korea for almost 3 years. And while I was there, I was an English teacher and I wrote English textbooks for students. So it was an amazing experience. I miss it so much. When I finished university, I was looking to sort of find a way to see the world. I didn't really know yet what I wanted to do for a career. But I knew I really wanted to travel. I knew I really wanted to kind of get out of Canada where I grew up and where I went to school, and explore. And so, my cousin actually was teaching English in Busan, South Korea. And there was a job at her school open. And so I ended up taking it and going over. So, about 2 months after I graduated university, I moved to South Korea and I ended up staying for almost 3 years. I finished 1 year, came back to Canada for a bit, and then I returned. So, while I was there, I got to teach students from age 3 years old, up until, adult age. I got to travel all over to China, Thailand, Japan, and it was an incredible experience. And after I returned home, I missed it for a long time. So I think it was hard kind of coming back and, figuring out what I was going to kind of do next, because I had such an exciting experience overseas. But I think that is really what gave me a taste for, loving travel, for loving exploring other cultures, other places. And so I think that sort of like planted the seeds in me, to want to continue to kind of explore for my career.
Absolutely, Natasha Daly, because you're from Toronto in Canada, as you mentioned.
Yes, I'm from Toronto, born in Toronto, raised in Toronto, and then for university, I actually went to school in Halifax, Nova Scotia, on the east coast of Canada. So, I lived in Canada my whole life until I graduated university at age 22. So I was at that point ready to kind of get out and see the world.
And since then, you are working as a journalist at National Geographic. And these last few months, for example, you have been covering some stories about animals and also about the pandemic.
Yes, so I've been at National Geographic for almost 6 years now, which is, I can't believe it's been that long because time has flown by. But for the past year, I've been really focused on covering how animals are affected by coronavirus. So what I do at Nat Geo is I write stories about animals. That's what I do. So I cover everything from wildlife conservation, to animal welfare, to the ways that kind of humans interact with and exploit animals. So I do a range of sort of happy stories about how people are kind of helping to protect animals, but I also do a lot of coverage on how humans, affect animals for better or for worse. So yes, this past year has been, for everyone, unlike, anything else we've dealt with. I think for so many journalists, we basically, in a lot of ways, pivoted really to kind of covering our own beats, through the lens of COVID, because it took over everything. So it was impossible to kind of tell stories without, mentioning COVID or without looking at any story through that lens. So, I'm lucky that I had a beat that was so, narrow. So animals, I tell stories about animals. And of course, as we know, this is zoonotic disease. We knew very little and we still know very little about how animals are affected by the virus. So it's been a journey over the past year to try to not only tell these stories, but really find out information that a lot of people just didn't really know. I mean, a lot of this has been a mystery. So I've had to sort of work on uncovering information in real time, which has been an adventure.
Not only covering animals is very important, but I feel that this last 365 days, the animals have been left behind, I feel, because we often forget that we are not alone in this planet.
Yes, I think that's a really important point, because I think that if this virus did sort of anything in terms of increasing our knowledge about the natural world, I think it really showed us how wildlife and humans are so interconnected. I mean, this virus, this coronavirus, is a zoonotic disease. It's believed, and of course we still don't yet know the origins, but it's believed to have originated in some sort of wild vector. So an animal in the wild. We don't know yet how it jumped to humans, but that's sort of the belief. So I think, we're unable to ignore the fact that how we encroach on the environment and on wildlife, and how we sort of our relationships with the natural world, it's fundamentally linked. So I think that this virus has affected humans on a massive, massive scale. But I think what I've sort of been lucky to do is there's so many great journalists and scientists and all sorts of people focused on telling the stories of how the virus has affected humans. But I've sort of focused on how it's affected animals, and it's been really interesting, I think, to find those stories and tell them.
So you've been following multiple cases concerning multiple species, for example, orangutans, bonobos. So Natasha Daly, what conclusions have you made from this last year?
Well, it's a good question. I think, for starters, we don't the number of species who have contracted coronavirus naturally is actually very few. So we have dogs, cats, tigers, lions, minks, ferrets, and gorillas. I think I may be missing one or two, but the reality is that there are a handful of species who've contracted this virus. And so my challenge has been telling those stories. So last year I reported on the first tigers to contract coronavirus at the Bronx Zoo in New York. And then, I recorded on, as you mentioned, I reported on some bonobos and orangutans at the San Diego Zoo in California that actually received a vaccine that was developed for animals just a couple months ago. So every time I kind of come across a new story about animals and the virus, it's always it's been groundbreaking in some ways, these cases. It's sort of the first time this is happening. The first case in tigers, the first vaccine for animals. I reported on the first dog in the US to test positive. So it's been different from what I'm used to reporting, which I'm used to telling stories about systemic issues. So things that have issues with animals that have been in place for a while, and I'm trying to kind of find a new angle on. But this, over the past year, all of these stories have been completely new, and which brings its own set of challenges. But I think it's also it's a really as a reporter, I think it's given me a way to sort of tell stories in a way I normally wouldn't, because there's not a lot that has been written on this situation yet so far. So it's been really interesting. It's been a long year, but it's been as a reporter, it's been challenging.
Sure, and 24/7 you are living with three rabbits. Are they vulnerable to this pandemic, or are they so strong and powerful?
Good question. I think, yes, I have three pet bunnies. They're all rescue bunnies. So I rescued them all from a shelter. They had been found outside and various things. So now they live in my home with me. They're all litter box trained, which means just like a cat, they can use the litter box. And so they're kind of free roaming. They roam around my apartment, do their thing. And yeah, it's a good question about the virus, because I have thought about that. Is if I got the virus, could my pets be could they be susceptible? I don't think I've gotten the virus, not that I know of, so they've been okay. But yeah, I think it's every pet owner, it's crossed your mind. It's like, what if my pet got this and I just didn't know about it? So it's kind of funny. It's like I'm reporting on stories about pets and owners getting the virus, but I'm also a pet owner myself. So it's sort of like you're living through those fears and concerns that you're writing about, which doesn't happen all that often.
A word that is very important for you, Natasha Daly, is, as you said, welfare, which means the health, happiness, and fortunes of an animal. So you mean that they have feelings and they are not very far from us.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to describe it. I think that, so I report a lot on animal welfare, which means I tell stories of how animals suffer in many cases because of human activity. And so it's I think over the past few decades, and especially over the past 10 years or so, I think people have become a lot more aware that that animals feel pain just like we do, that animals have complex social lives, that they have complex relationships with their families, with their children. So I think that people are becoming more aware of this, and in turn are becoming more interested in hearing these stories. And so I write a lot about kind of how people like you and me affect animals. So a lot of the things I've talked about are kind of how our travel affects animals, and how the products we buy affects animals. So I think that it's really great for me to be able to tell stories that I think the average person can really relate to, and might even change their own habits. So yeah, I mean, I think that's rewarding.
And if we take the span of time and history, there is also the conservation. And I believe that you are more focused on the present and future, and not really focusing on the past, because they are not in your field of studies.
Yeah, I tell a lot of stories about conservation, and one that comes to mind is one that I wrote about a year and a half ago now about the world's largest refugee camp, actually in Bangladesh. And over at the time, 600,000 people were living in this refugee camp, but the location of the camp was actually situated right on top of a really vital elephant migration corridor. By no fault of anyone. This is just where the camp happened to be, but it happened to be on this corridor. So what was happening was these elephants were trying to migrate, do their usual path, but they were hitting the camp. And unfortunately, there was a lot of human elephant conflict. Some people died because elephants were, walking through, kind of freaked out, and ended up trampling some homes. So that story, I think, was so interesting to me because it really showed the kind of, ways that humans and animals can kind of intersect, and then tension can arise when no one's intending for that to happen, but it just sort of did. So I think the kind of big plan was to hopefully reopen a corridor so the elephants could safely migrate through the camp. But of course, that's just such a logistical challenge because you have to move homes, you have to move like hundreds of thousands of people. So I think that's an example of sort of the kind of story I like to tell that's very current. It's about kind of what's happening now, and it's solutions oriented. So it's telling a story about a problem, but also including how people hope to maybe fix it in the future. So I don't just like to tell stories of like this horrible thing is happening to animals, and that's it. I really like to include in my stories, what people are doing to try to help, or what like even you as a reader can try and do to help.
When I said that you weren't interested in the past, I was meaning that you are not reporting on dinosaurs, for example. And as you said, on migrant population that are struggling because of climate change, of some animals and...
Yeah, I don't report on dinosaurs. That's the one, I guess, animal that I don't cover. But I have some colleagues at Nat Geo who do great stories, great storytelling about dinosaurs, more on our science desk. So yeah, I'm writing about animals that are alive right now, not extinct yet, and fingers crossed, I can keep telling those stories about animals that are alive right now, and more aren't going to go extinct.
And just before, you just mentioned the fact that you like to send a positive message at the end and to find some solution. And this is exactly what you've done in your feature stories called Suffering Unseen, the dark truth behind wildlife tourism. Because at the beginning of the video, you're portraying all the chaos happening, and in the second part you're showing, for example, the elephants that are kept safely, in which the tourists cannot approach them too close, and the elephants are responsible and they are the one deciding if they want to meet the tourists.
Yeah, exactly. So, the story you're talking about, I reported over 2 years on 4 different continents. So I basically set out to tell a story of how our travels, so basically tourism and people's kind of desire to get close to wild animals, is driving an industry where a lot of animals are actually being exploited. So, and this is really being fueled through social media. So, for example, riding elephants or swimming with dolphins or watching circus performances. These are things that people love to kind of do on vacation and then take videos and photos and share on social media. And then other people see it and kind of want to do the same thing. So that was a story I set out to tell. I spent time in Thailand where the video you're describing took place. And I visited many elephant camps where tourists go when they ride elephants, not realizing, of course, that these elephants are trained in ways that can be very painful. They're kept in very small enclosures a lot of the time on chains. But as you said, I really wanted to not just tell the story about the really horrible stuff, but I wanted to include how things are starting to change. So there are many kind of sanctuaries opening up for elephants where elephants are taken off the chains, where they're able to kind of roam around and kind of engage in natural behaviors, and where people can't ride them, can't touch them, they don't have to do tricks. So that was something that I really wanted to include, to let sort of, if you're watching my video or reading my story, for you as the reader to kind of decide, okay, what do I want to fund with my money? What do I want to participate in? Do I want to participate in an experience that, yes, lets me ride an elephant, but it may also be perpetuating suffering in that elephant's life? Or would I rather, have an experience where I can't get close to that elephant, but I can watch it sort of walk around and kind of do its thing. So I think that's really what I wanted to kind of show the viewer, is that there are options, and ultimately I can't tell you what to do. And that's not, I don't want to tell you what to do, but you can sort of choose for yourself.
And again, on this video, we often say that journalists have to put their emotion next to them, to stay impartial. But Natasha Daly, I feel that you put it a lot of you in this story, because, for example, at night, you filmed the elephant with the spike around his leg, and I felt that you were so sad for him. I don't know if you were almost crying, but it was very touching to watch.
Thanks. Yeah. You're describing we went to one elephant camp during the day, and there was this very young elephant who was on a chain, a very short chain, and around her ankle, there were some spikes from the chain pressing into her ankle, and it was causing her pain, and so she couldn't put her foot down. So for myself and the photographer, Kirsten, who was with me, it was very shocking. And so we asked her caretakers, we said, does she always stay on this spike chain? And they said, oh no, we always take it off at nighttime. And so we actually returned at night with permission of the camp to kind of photograph it at night. And while we were there, we checked on her, and it turned out that she still was on that same spiked chain. So I think for us, and yeah, you'll see in the video, I mean, I'm filming myself in real time finding her, and it was very, I think, distressing seeing this animal right in front of me in so much pain. And so, yeah, I mean, I think as a journalist, and again, I spent a month there recording this or reporting this story, and it's very important to keep my personal feelings to myself. Not only because my job is a reporter and my job is to report and not inject my personal opinions into the story I'm telling, but I think just for me to be able to get through it, to be able to spend entire days at these camps with these animals and then return the next day over and over and over. The easiest way for me to sort of get through it was to try and check my emotions, kind of at the door and focus on my job. And that's what made it kind of easy for me to kind of keep going and reporting every day. Now, that being said, I mean, you can see me in the video getting emotional at times because, you know, I'm a human first and a journalist second. So I think that at times, yes, it was, you see me reacting. But yeah, I think that's just the struggle and the hard part about reporting on these sorts of stories. And it goes for any journalist who's reporting on difficult emotional situations where there's human or animal suffering. It can be hard at times.
I am very curious about the process behind this feature story. So, as you said, you were with Brooklyn photographer Kirsten Luss, and for reporting this story, you traveled for around 18 months over 4 different countries.
Yes, so we spent almost 2 years reporting this story. Of course, we took breaks in between. We were home and then we went back. I think we spent a total of 4 months in the field, and what that means is like 4 months on the ground reporting this story. We went to Hawaii, we went to the Amazon rainforest, we went to Thailand, we went to Russia. We went all over the world because what we really wanted to do was make this a global story and not just make it like what's happening in one place. Because the reality is that people traveling to interact with animals is something that happens all over the world. So it was, you know, a lot. I mean, Kirsten and I are so close that like we work really well together. So I think that's also what helped us sort of get through it, was like we had each other. We were investigating this together. And so having a partner to do this with made all the difference. But it was a lot of work. And then, of course, you know, you asked about the process. But after I finished all of the reporting, I then had to sit down and write this story. So I had to figure out, how do I pull in all of the different sort of elements of what I reported over these many months in the field to tell one story. So that was challenging.
If I understood correctly, Natasha Daly, you mean that Kirsten and yourself are very complementary. For example, she's the one taking the photo while you're questioning the locals.
Yeah, so she's the photographer, I'm the writer. So exactly. So when we're on a location, she's taking photos, and I'm interviewing people. I would always have a translator if I didn't speak the language wherever I was, to help me communicate. But that's what we were. But you know, after, when we'd leave somewhere, when we'd sort of be planning out the next day, we were both working together on the investigation, if that makes sense. But then when we were actually at a location, we'd each be doing kind of different things. But ultimately, it was the same investigation. So having someone else to be there with you and bounce ideas off of, and you know, if someone told me something that didn't really make sense, she was there, and so we could sort of talk about it, and that made all the difference. And you know, we hope that we're going to be able to do another story together sometime soon, because for both of us it was a wonderful experience to do this together.
And during these 4 months on the field, what was your relationship with rejection? Because maybe that all these people, all these locals knew that you were going to portray them in a very negative way and to show the dark side, if I can say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, of course, a really good question. I think our intention was always just to tell the truth and find the truth about what was going on. So we never intended to portray anyone in a negative or positive light. We just wanted to portray situations as they were. And so I think that was sort of what it came down to. And I would always say, tell people who I am, a National Geographic journalist, the story I was telling about wildlife tourism, and then essentially let them tell me their story. And so, everything you read in the magazine and everything you see in our documentary is true based on what we observed and what people told us. So I think that, I was a bit concerned because wildlife tourism has gotten a lot of negative attention over the past several years, especially elephant riding, etc. And so I didn't know if people would want to talk to me to talk about this subject. But I think that what I found was that people really wanted the opportunity to share their side of the story. And that was what was most important to me, was that I would let people tell their own story and then put it in my larger story and let the reader sort of decide what they agreed with or didn't agree with or whatever. So I think I found that, people, if they had the opportunity to either talk to me to share their story or not talk to me, most of the time people chose to talk and share their story and share their opinion. And I think that was really... I really appreciated every single person that took the time to talk to me and share, because I know it's not an easy subject to discuss.
On one side, the animals are treated very badly, but as you said, when you were talking to the locals, maybe that you had some empathy for them because, sometimes they are forced to do it. But I also believe that this story is 2 years old. So right now, maybe that the animals are happier.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think that, of course, everywhere I went, almost everywhere I went, I had tremendous empathy, especially for people who were workers at a larger camp, for example, who made very little money, who did this job in many cases because they didn't have another option. I mean, I think that ultimately what it comes down to, and this is the case in so many places, is that there's the kind of where the power is sort of at the top, the owners of the camps, the government, and kind of everyone under that who is working for very little money. They don't have a lot of control over the situation. But I will say that I think ultimately who is in control in any form of wildlife tourism is the consumer. So it's travelers, it's people who are willing to pay money for these activities, because the activities only exist because people are willing to pay for them. And, if people decide, I don't want to pay for elephant rides anymore, and the money's not there, then the operators would have to kind of change what they're doing. So I think that if there's any sort of important takeaway from this story, it's that the role of the consumer is so, so, so important. And that's what dictates everything. So really, I mean, I think the market ultimately follows the consumer, and the consumer in this case is you and me, or the people who are on vacation paying for these activities. So
Yes, absolutely. Because at the end, I think that it was the final thought and reflection. You said consumer have the power to change things.
exactly. That's all it comes down to. The consumers have the power to change so much about this industry. And so that's the message I wanted people to take away, that like you reading this story, if you don't like what you're reading, you can actually do something about it. You can, make decisions not to participate in this stuff when you go on vacation. You can kind of tell your friends and family. And I think ultimately that is sort of was the power of this story. And, one example that I love from this, you asked me if any of the animals are maybe doing better now. Yeah, I mean, at least one. So there was a young elephant who was very, very sick, who we found he was being kept under a stadium in Thailand on a short chain. And he had a sore on his head. His leg was swollen. Anyway, we put him in our story, and people were so just outraged at his condition that people, thousands and thousands of people, signed a petition to get him taken to a sanctuary. And one sanctuary listened, and they actually were able to secure his release. And now he is doing so well. He's living at Elephant Nature Park in Thailand. He's happy. He's healed. And so I know that that was because of our story. And no one would even know he existed if they hadn't seen him. So that's, a really good feeling if we can kind of help one animal, and which the story did. I think that kind of made it all worth it. So it's really, really great to kind of be able to follow his journey and see how he's doing now. And it shows the power that people have to kind of make change. So people saw him, they signed petitions, they made it happen. And so, people do have power to make the world a better place for animals.
This elephant is living his best life. I guess that right now he's taking a little bath in the swimming pool. Maybe, we don't know.
Probably. He loves water. He loves splashing around, and yeah, he really is living his best life. He is doing so well. So now he has hopefully years and years ahead of him of living sort of this carefree lifestyle, which feels really great to know.
Natasha Daly, he's an elephant. Of course that he loves water.
Exactly, yes. I don't know if there's any elephant that doesn't. Maybe somewhere, but he's living water, he's loving water, he's doing everything an elephant kind of should be doing. So it's really great.
When I was reading the full story and article, I noticed that I don't know if this is the elephant you were mentioning, but you were always referring to Mina's life.
Yes, Mina. So Mina was the elephant that was kept on the short chain with the spikes, who I returned and found at night. This elephant his name was Glyhom. So he was a boy and Mina was a girl. But yeah, I know it's hard. I referenced a few kind of younger elephants in the story.
And you are explaining that they are following a very strict process all along their life. For example, performing in shows until age 10, becoming after that a riding elephant, and then she will die.
Yeah, I mean, elephants, I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but elephants can live as long as humans. I mean, they can live they can live up to 80 years, for example. So they have very long lives. So the idea that, they're kind of, when they're born, they spend 10 years performing in shows, and then they spend the rest of their life basically giving rides. I mean, it is a long time to be doing those things. And of course, it depends on the elephant, it depends on the camp. But, generally speaking, this is sort of the trajectory of the life of an elephant in the tourism industry. So yeah, I mean, it's a long, long time to be doing these things when you think about it. And to be living in a tiny stall, to be kept on a chain. I mean, for a lot of elephants, this is sort of the reality. So it's I think the lifespan factor is something that really makes it shocking to people.
And in the future, when it will be possible, what location would you love to cover in the world?
Oh, that's such a good question. Yeah, I mean, I haven't traveled pretty much like anyone else. I haven't traveled in over a year. Such a good question. I would love to go to Australia. There's so many amazing wildlife stories to tell in Australia. I would love to report there. I would love to go back to the Amazon rainforest. I've been there 2 times now to tell stories, but I want to go back. Like, I'll never get tired of going there and telling stories about animals. Where else? I would love to go one day to Antarctica. That would be a dream for me to report on. I don't know if it'll happen anytime soon, but one day that would be incredible. But yeah, I'm just excited to be able to travel again. I've spent a year, telling stories using my phone from home. Everyone at Nat Geo is working from home right now. So once I can travel to tell a story again in a field and like meet with people and interview people in person, not over the phone, that's going to be really exciting. So I'm definitely looking forward to the day that that can happen again. As I'm sure everyone is looking forward to being able to travel and kind of get out in the world too. I'm sure you are as well.
But whenever you are going, unfortunately, I feel that your work will always be related to how social media and societal trend shape all the perception because of the mondialization and the globalization.
Absolutely. I do a lot of reporting on how social media and social trends shape our perceptions of animals, our interactions with animals, all that stuff. Because, and it's not like I chose to really focus on that. It's what naturally happened. So I'm telling stories about animals and people, and naturally, social media and the internet and trends is all going to kind of be a part of that, because that's what's affecting this stuff so much. So yeah, you're right. I think that I'm going to continue to kind of that social media is going to continue to play a role in my storytelling just because it's so prominent. It's just like kind of right in the middle of everything. I mean, I wish I could predict what kind of the next big trend is going to be with animals, but I don't know yet. But it's important to me also to tell those stories because it's like, it's very current. It's very sort of like what is happening right now. And I think that a lot of people can relate when I'm telling stories about animals that, how they're affected by like people's behavior online or people on vacation. Like people can relate to that rather than, if I'm telling a story about an animal in a country, where it's like, people poaching animals, for example, for use in kind of, for example, so elephants being poached for their ivory tusks. It's like the average person reading my story is never going to buy ivory, so maybe they can't relate to that. But when I'm telling a story about how like people on vacation are interacting with animals, people reading my story can relate to that. Like either maybe you've ridden an elephant or someone who has, or like maybe you want to get up close and take a picture with an elephant or whatever. So I really like telling those stories that like the average person can relate to, because I feel like that has the potential to have a lot of impact and can make change.
And something else that is prominent to your work, Natasha Daly, is a special interest in the intersection of animals and culture. For example, you wrote a word called How Today's Toys May Be Harming Your Daughter.
Yeah, so the story you're talking about, I wrote several years ago when we did at Nat Geo, we did a special issue on gender. So how gender shapes our perceptions of culture and vice versa. So yeah, I did a story on, it didn't really have anything to do with animals, but it's fun. Like occasionally I can write stories that don't have anything to do with animals, but that are just interesting. So I did, yeah, that story on how kind of toys designed for girls and boys can actually affect those children's development. So that was a really interesting story that it was fun that I got the chance to write. But yeah, I mean, I think at Nat Geo, what's really interesting is that we have different desks. So we have like, I'm on the animals desk. I tell stories about animals. And then we have the science desk. We have the culture desk. We have the environment desk and the travel desk. But so everyone, like each team does their own storytelling, but often stories will really kind of overlap. So animals and science, there are lots of stories kind of in that space. Animals and travel, environment and science. So I think like that's, rather than look at it through like each subject is like contained in a box, we really do overlap a lot. And I think that just reflects the reality of our world. I mean, all of these subjects are intertwined. Nothing sort of exists in a vacuum. And that's the kind of storytelling we like to do. It's just showing how everything kind of intersects. But then like all the writers, we all sort of have our own area of focus. So that's great too.
You mean that every of your work related to animals is always connected to every domain. So Natasha Daly is at the center of everything.
Yeah, I mean I think you could ask like any writer at Nat Geo and everyone would feel like their work is at the center of everything cuz like, I yes, I tell stories about animals, but like it's almost like you can connect it to travel, definitely. Science, for sure, environment, it's all everything's connected. I have colleagues that tell stories about the environment, like write stories about plastic, like how plastic is affecting our planet. But then that connects to everything else. So like plastic affects animals, it affects like science, it affects cultural habits. So I think that it's sort of everything is intertwined. And that's ultimately just really important for everyone to remember. Like nothing exists sort of like on its own in a bubble. So I it's cool whenever I can sort of like tell different aspects of stories concerning animals. There's so many stories to tell, and I think maybe when people think about writing about animals, they think like I'm writing about stories about animal behavior, like why a dog does why a dog barks or whatever. But really, like, there's so many different topics that relate back to animals. So my job is always interesting. I never run out of stories to tell.
This is funny you bring this up because it would be so interesting. Okay, I'm going to restart my scene, okay. This is funny you bring this up because it would be so interesting if you make a sort of movie or documentary about nature, because the video I watched concerning the elephants and your 18-month stories, I could watch something like that for 3 hours straight, you know?
Oh, well, thank you. That's very nice of you to say. Oh, I had so much fun making that documentary. Of course, the subject was not fun. It was very serious, but I personally really, really enjoyed that. So I would love to do more kind of documentary storytelling. I think that at National Geographic, we actually do a lot of that. Like we have our magazine, we have our kind of our website where our stories publish. But then we also, I'm sure a lot of people watching this may be familiar with Nat Geo's Instagram account, which is where photographers share photographs. And so there's lots of like ways that we try to tell stories that is not just like text. So it's like, yes, there's the text story, but also we like when we can to make videos for social media or short documentaries or all sorts of different ways to tell one story. So I loved that through that experience, I was able to kind of expand my my storytelling from just writing to telling a story through video as well. So I would love to keep doing that. I thought it was really great.
And concerning National Geographic logo, since I'm young, I never understood why it was a yellow rectangle on the black background.
That's a really good question. My guess is because basically the yellow rectangle is the shape of the magazine cover. So when you see the magazine, you see the border is the yellow rectangle. So that's basically where that came from. Like as I don't know if many people who are familiar with National Geographic through Instagram or something may not realize, but our magazine started in 1888, so it's very, very old. Originally it was just the magazine, and originally there weren't even photos in the magazine, which is so interesting because everyone like associates Nat Geo with amazing photography. But for the first, for a long time, there weren't photographs. It was only a magazine with text. And then eventually, of course, the editors started incorporating photography in black and white, and then eventually it color. And now, of course, Nat Geo is not just the magazine, but is Instagram, is online, is video, is, the channel. So it's really cool to see how it's evolved. I mean, it's such an old kind of legacy institution that has been telling stories for, a really, really long time, over 100 years. So it's really cool to feel to be part of that sort of legacy and continue the legacy of storytelling.
Natasha Daly, Your explanation made my day. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, Victor. This has been it's been so great to talk to you and to your audience, and it was really nice to be here.